Deborah, as you already heard, she was elected to the Tulalip Tribe's Board of Directors in 2012. She's a board member of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and she has decades of experience as a policy analyst, program developer, communications specialist, and committed cultural advocate and volunteer in the tribal and surrounding communities. For me, who has a secret policy wonk legislative love, I wanted to talk a little bit about the legislative work that she's done. She has served as a legislative policy analyst in the Office of Governmental Affairs for the Tulalip Tribes from 2005 to 2012. She engaged in the legislative process on behalf of the Tulalip Tribes, providing quality analysis of issues most pertinent to the exercise of sovereignty and tribal governance. She had particular emphasis in the areas of education, finance, taxation, and healthcare. Deborah has spent several years in communications and helped to produce video and print journalism work for the Native American communities. And she graduated from the University of Washington with a Bachelor of Arts degree in American Ethnic Studies and Sociology. Deborah?
Often, I mentioned earlier that you have to have a strong voice when you do this kind of work. Often you're in a room where there's majority in policy, and of course working with U.S. senators and congressional members. Primarily they're male. And so being a female and being an Indigenous woman, you have to have a very strong, powerful voice. So that's not a time to remain silent when you walk into the halls of Congress. So if you've never done that before, I ask you to take a trip to Washington, D.C. and fight for an issue that you care most about, and let your, if not also attend town halls, join senators, congressmen and women, let them know how you feel about not only this issue of sexual violence and the importance of protecting women, but also the communities in which we live, the environment. When we say protecting women, also for us as Indigenous women, it's protecting Mother Earth. It's food sovereignty. It's how we feed our children. It's how we have relationships with one another. It's also income inequality, how we're paid at the work that we offer to the world, the work that we do. So all of these issues are all intertwined, they're intersectional. And we discuss that, you know, sometimes around our kitchen tables or with our friends, but it's important that we take our own truth and we take our own belief systems to the U.S. Congress, to local city government, to the homes in which we live, and that we keep speaking, because it's important that we understand each other. And maybe we speak different languages, but that we come together and we unite as a people. Last week I was at Eastern Washington University, and I was teaching a class. I was an invited speaker, and it was interesting how some of the, I'll just say it, some of our white male partners had felt like they didn't have a space, especially in a room of a lot of women. And I thought, wow, that's not what we want to do either. How do we create spaces where we're not doing this pushing and pulling? We create a space where, like our elder said this morning, that space of balance, because that's what it feels like we're doing. Is that whole right, left, that whole male, female, and really there's pieces of male and female in each and every one of us. We carry that. And those are our sacred teachings, that if we follow those sacred teachings, and often they're in our native way, they're very simple teachings. You honor the earth. You honor your body, your mind, and your spirit. And each person you connect with, you try and leave them with good words or good thoughts. And if they harm you, you pray for them. It's not about attacking and retaliation, which is sometimes what we're taught to do. It's about loving and trying to understand and having pity, taking pity for those who you may not understand. These are some of our sacred laws. These are some of our sacred teachings. And in order for myself to come and speak to the places I go to, I also ask for permission to the traditional areas in which I travel, the sacred lands of the indigenous peoples. And even when I walk through the doors here in Seattle, I look at the four directions. So for me, in my vision, this is like a longhouse. There's four directions in this room. And our elders always say, speak from your heart. And sometimes that is the scariest, the most frightening thing you can do, because you may not know what you're going to say. Like how many times have you thought, I have no idea what I'm going to say, and I feel like it could be wrong, or someone might take it wrong, and then you just start to develop all these reasons why you need to research what you're going to say. So you have that knowledge and you can regurgitate that knowledge. When in our traditional teachings, you already have it. If you believe in what you have, if you believe in your spiritual path as a human being, and you understand that everything that you have been through has brought you to where you are here today, that you have a story, and that your story is important. And it is equally as important as the person next to you, because you are no better than anyone else, and no one else is any better than you. And that is what it's like to be part of the circle. And as we look at who we are as citizens of the United States, maybe family members within our own family, or maybe we look at ourselves globally, we're all human beings. And when we talk about safety, when we talk about who we are as American citizens, as maybe African American, Asian American, an indigenous person, your identity is what you carry forward. Your identity is what you choose to create, how you choose to live. And I believe when we start to honor that space within each other, when we honor that space, even when we come to work and we know someone's having a hard day, if we just take a moment just to honor that that person may be in a different space, maybe you don't agree, but allow them to have that space. When we say we become one, it's not the exact same. When we become one heart and one mind, that means we're just connecting with each other, with our own vibration, with our own belief systems. And if we're going to talk about changing communities and providing safety, we're going to have to listen to one another and know that the words that are shared amongst each other are only to help us grow. And what we don't need, the negative words or the put downs or those things that hurt us, that we can let those pass by us, because we're in a time and space, we're in a time where we do need to come together, and we need to be very, very heartfelt. We've been trying to come at the mind, really kind of educate, and that is it is critically important that you have a strong mind. Do not get me wrong. But having a strong heart and a strong spirit, and how you connect the mind and the spirit is I think this next era of which we're coming upon. In the time where women are second-class citizens, are not paid equally, and are raped, because I have to say, some of the young men I've worked with said, well, that's a cool thing to do. It's just rape is part of our culture, and you can't stop it. But I would challenge that to say, yes, we will stop it, and we will change that trajectory. We will change how we view, how we treat one another. And it has to start with our own truth and how we see ourselves. And if you don't see yourself as important in this world, then I think our elder here would say, maybe you need to go to the mountains. Maybe you need to go sit by the water or reconnect with the vibration of what this earth puts out. Because there's a story to tell within each one of us. There's a passion and there's a drive within each one of us just waiting to come out. And sometimes we're just waiting for that acceptance. Because I personally, and I'll be traveling to DC this weekend to work, but I personally, each time I run into someone who knows that I work on domestic violence, sexual assault, and they say, I haven't told anyone, it really saddens me that there's so much shame around the victims, because the shame really should be in the perpetrators, those who rape, not the victims. And we've got to change that story. And sadly, it is happening slow. But the hope is that at least we're creating spaces where our sisters and yes, our brothers need to come forward to say that rape is not okay, sexual violence is not okay, dating violence is not okay. The amount of rapes on college campuses is never okay. And I was just at Eastern Washington University where several students were saying it happens every day, all the time. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to send my daughter or even my son or our children or grandchildren to college so that this can happen to them. We can change that. And that requires some dedication for not only, like I mentioned earlier, each person in the room, but those outside of the room who are on their everyday commute, who are traveling, going to school, going to work, and are in these spaces where domestic violence and sexual assault is happening. We need to create spaces where they can come forward, and I believe that it starts with us. It extends out to our police departments and how they handle. It extends out to our social services. It extends out to the teachers in the classroom. And I work in a school district, so I have the honor of working with children. But in my first 2 weeks of working in the school district, there were 4 reports of child sexual assault in the school district. And these are children who came to school and reported to their counselors that they were sexually assaulted. And I'd like to say I can't imagine going to school after being sexually assaulted. But the truth is, that was my life. The perpetrator drove me to school. And I had to sit in the classroom and listen to the teacher and try and remain a good student so that someday I can go to college. Someday I could attend the University of Washington and be a Husky. And it took a lot of courage. It took a lot of concentration to realize that I can be somebody. I can go to school. I can graduate, and I just have to stay focused enough and get through the abuse so that I can live the life I'm meant to live. And I never thought I would ever share that story, ever. The first time I shared that story, I was 24 years old. And so how many of our kids are carrying these stories? How many kids are sitting in the classrooms after being assaulted? Maybe physically, maybe sexually. And how do we stop that? How do we change that? How do we help those parents, those guardians who want to love their children but just don't know how, who want to change their actions but just don't know how? And those patterns of abuse, how do we stop that? And I'm not here with the answers, but I do have a lot of the questions, and I am willing to sit at those tables, the round tables, and start to discuss how we change, how we make it safe, because I don't think those teachers could ever know what this child was going through in their classroom. But I will say, this is my second year working for the school district, and I will say that walking up to one of the schools, trying to help the students there, it really triggered me. So I really understand what sexual violence, what it means, and how triggering and how those memories can haunt you. And I do know that it takes a tremendous amount of work just to sometimes get out of bed and to be in a healthy relationship and to love your children and to treat others with respect the best way you know how when you're hurting inside. And I think for many survivors, they say they feel alone, very alone. And I encourage each and every one of us here to not make those spaces so lonely for people who have been through trauma, and for us to be good listeners to not only ourselves and what we're meant to do in this world, but to also look to the person to your right, the person to your left. And let's not judge so harshly. Let's just be open to listen. Let's just be open to make that change. So when we talk about policy changes and law, maybe you've never written a law before, but I can say that it's not that hard. It really comes from a place of this is what I believe. And maybe you can ask a person who is law trained to help you write it into terms that fit within the U.S. Constitution or your city ordinances or your tribal laws. But whatever you do, do not remain silent. Sharing my voice in 2012, when the Violence Against Women Act in the Senate was about to be passed without Native provisions, without Native American women receiving protections, was not okay with myself. It wasn't okay with other advocates and other folks who support us and our allies. It wasn't okay with our tribal leaders. So we stood together. But what I constantly heard in the Senate was that, I'm sorry, we didn't see your face. There wasn't a face to this. And I guess if it's been part of the U.S. law to erase Native American culture, to not put us in the history books and tell the truth, and if they've taken us out of the law and told us that we can't practice our religious ceremonies, when I was a child, we would go to jail. My parents and our aunties and uncles would go to jail for participating in ceremony. These are laws that prevented us, or at least tried to prevent us from singing our songs. So this was all a part of the design that we're trying to stop. And with your help, we can stop it. We can bring the voice back of our Indigenous families, our Indigenous relatives. Because when we come together in this way, we become brothers and sisters. We meet each other now. We change each other's life by just being in each other's presence. And so with this movement, and I would ask the city to bring circles together, bring everyday citizens together, and let's talk about what we need to do to change this world. And we don't have to put stipulations. It can be very simple. We can create simple concepts in health, education, the environment, policy, all of these ideas. If it's not working, let's change it. And yes, it seems, I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I know when the Violence Against Women Act came, and I was there in the United States, Senator Murray said, well, Deb, I'll give you one shot. Tomorrow morning, come and tell the US Senate why Native Americans should be protected in a bill. And that's what I did. And I wrote a speech that morning, and I brought my speech, and I just told my story of being a child, having an auntie who was killed, having a sister, a young tribal sister who was murdered, and having others around my life that have disappeared and have been murdered. And I just told the story, and I asked for the United States Congress to please pass the Violence Against Women Act with Native American women included. And in 2013, it passed with Native American women included. And now we have a bill it passed the House. We have a bill, the Violence Against Women Act, in the United States on the Senate side. And so many are saying that it doesn't look good. We will have a tough time having our Republican members pass the bill as it stands. So we really need your support to help us pass the Violence Against Women Act so we can make sure that our survivors are receiving services, that we have our police officers and our college campuses that are protected, and that we stop these crimes against women and children. And yes, I want to mention men because I get letters from men and Facebook messages and posts and texts like, when are they going to help the men? And that should always be an easy answer for us to say, yes, you are included and men need to be protected. Our young boys need to be safe as well. And overall, we just need to stop the violence. It has to stop. Perpetrators should not be able to walk out of the spaces wherever they're raping, wherever they're at. Justice needs to be served, and we need to make sure we hold people accountable and stop blaming victims for what's happening to them. So I'm going to look at a time check here, and I think, yeah, and I think so. Again, I have a list of what the bill offers, and I think most of us can just look at the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act 2019, and look at the provisions. Most of all, we need your support, we need your voice. There's some very incredible provisions that will help us get to the next stage. The Violence Against Women Act started in 1999, and it has its reauthorization. And so we're now past reauthorization, so it is critically important for funding of our programs, of our grant programs that go across the nation to help support our women. So this is the work that we have. We need your support. We need you to call our congressional offices and tell them to please pass. And this is the Senate side now. The House side has passed it. It goes to the Senate. We need the Senate to pass it, and then it will go to the president's desk for signing. And I say, Lord, help us on that one. But with your help, I believe we can get there again. So.
First of all, I'm a father of 2 daughters, and so this is very important to me, as my highest calling in life is to support them, protect them. So My question is, I've worked for Seattle Parks for 19 years, and I'm now pursuing a career as a police officer. And it's been really hard to get through the processes and all the testing and whatnot. And I have my own ideas about what a police officer should be and the kind of officers that we need. But I would just really want to hear from you what you think their role is in this. I've heard them mentioned several times, and I want to help people. I want to protect people and serve. So it's something I would like to hear.
Thank you. Great question. We mentioned police officers because we know the importance of safety and protection. So police officers are absolutely necessary in our communities. Understanding how to work with women who have been abused is critically important. So training police officers to understand when you work with a victim, how to work with that victim. And oftentimes, we hear stories about police officers who have said, oh, you know, you're okay, these things happen all the time. They don't take their stories as critically as important as they need to be, and oftentimes they don't go for prosecution. So sometimes they'll say, well, the courts are busy, you're not really going to be helped anyways, so they're discouraged from reporting often. And that's not in every case, that's in some cases. That's that's what we hear from victims. So police officers, how they respond, how they report and write up the incident is important. So there's a lot of training on what to see when you walk into a home. You know, what does a victim look like? What a perpetrator, and it's not often, they can be in business suits. So it's identifying, asking the right questions, assessing the situation. So it's important to train officers so that they do know how to handle these situations, and also make sure that the children in these situations are, in these violent, often very violent situations, that they're protected. So as much training, and reach out to folks who do this work. Interview victims and hear their stories, and then you'll begin to see the picture of what's happening and how secretive and how hidden this epidemic of violence is. But I wish you well on your journey. I think you'll make a great officer.